EHour students, it is a pleasure to be with you again. Yeah, pretty excited to have you here. Pretty excited to have our alum who are joining us today. We have a very distinct group of alum who really are not that far removed from your position as students. I say that through my own perception as now I'm getting older and I realize that they having graduated just a couple of years ago feels like I'm realizing that I'm old now. And I used to think I was young and I'm not. That's okay. It's better than the alternative. So I don't want to waste any time because they're here to share theirs with us and I want to be respectful of it. So let's just jump right into announcements so that we can get going here. Nick Gallo, can you do me a favor and confirm for me that you see my screen?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay. One moment here. Let's try that one more time.
There we go. IKEA.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Thank you, Nick Gallo. I appreciate that. Okay, students, here's the deal. Y'all have been phenomenal. I'm going to start off with the last one because I'm so excited.
Hey, Eric.
Yeah.
Hey, Eric. We're looking at IKEA, just so you know.
IKEA. Oh my gosh. IKEA doesn't help anybody.
No.
No one wants that. Well, one second. Can you see my presentation screen now?
Now we can't see anything except for you and our speakers.
Oh, well, that's a nice view, but that's not what we're looking for. What about now?
No.
No? I'm a little perplexed here. One moment. Let me try this again. What about now?
There we go.
Hey, all right, cool. Technology does work on occasion. Okay, students, I'm really excited to bring up this last point to you. You did a great job asking those mentorship questions that were assigned in Canvas. Phenomenal job. I'm so excited to read those as they come through and all the responses from alum that have accompanied them. But I want to remind you, please submit those by the due date that's listed in Canvas. That is dependent upon the letter that your last name begins with. So take a look at that and make sure that you get those in on time. If you have any questions, always here to help. Just send us an email to the address within the syllabus. I'm going to skip over the middle one. I'm going to jump up to the first. There's a new Zoom link, which obviously the 293 of you who are here have been wise enough to find and get into, but share it with your friends and just know that this will be the link that we'll use for the rest of the sessions throughout the semester. I had to change it out and I had some fears that it might cause confusion, but I'm glad that it hasn't. If I had a drum around me, I would do a drum roll, but I wanted to also announce to you some exciting news. On October 29th, another alum is going to be joining us for that session, and that alum is the Lieutenant Governor of the state of Michigan, Garland Gilchrist, who is going to talk to us, well, frankly, about a lot of different things, but really the intersection between the public sector, emerging technologies, and all the good stuff that's happening there. So really looking forward to that discussion. But my gosh, how could I even think about anything beyond what we have here today? These two I had mentioned are not that far removed. One graduated 2015, one 2017, both from that school down on Central Campus. I think it begins with an R. They're really smart guys. They have been able to achieve some pretty incredible stuff with the launch of their company, Brew, that they're going to talk to you about. One of the things I think that's pretty incredible to note is that they started this while they were a student, just like you. And they were very successful in being able to leverage the Michigan network that they now are a part of, and you're a part of as well, to really get the company off and running. And now they're at a point where they have over 3 million subscribers. They partially sold the company or a stake in the company last year for over $70 million, and couldn't be happier to have them. So I will cut myself off so that you can hear from the people who really matter. And Alex and Austin, if you want to turn on your videos, feel free, and I will cycle through this deck and following along.
We are here. Love the emceeing job.
Yeah, thanks, Eric.
Should we do this thing?
Yeah, I think so.
Well, first of all, thank you for having us, and really cool to see nearly 300 people joining this. So hopefully Austin and I can provide some insight that's helpful. So Eric gave us kind of the framework that it sounds like is used throughout this course, which is try, risk, fail, do. And so Austin and I decided to just divide it up. I'm going to be talking about a few things we tried in the journey of Morning Brew, as well as where we failed. And then Austin is going to be talking about risking and doing. So I guess we'll share our perspective here, and then there will be time for questions after, right?
Yep, you got it.
Sweet. Okay. So, well, for those of you that haven't heard of Morning Brew, which is totally fine, we are a business media brand. Austin and I founded the business when we were students at Michigan, officially sent our first newsletter in March of 2015. Austin was a sophomore, I was a senior. And we definitely didn't think we were going to be media entrepreneurs, that's for sure, until doing this. So things don't actually very rarely happen as expected. So what did we try? Well, we'd be remiss to not talk about trying writing a daily business newsletter, because that's what acted as the foundation for the business. Just for context, the picture you're looking at on the left is kind of like the OG Morning Brew. It was first sent out in November, December of 2014. And it was called Market Corner. I had started writing it because I was helping students prepare for job interviews. And I would always ask the question, how do you keep up with the business world? And every student would be like, I read the Wall Street Journal. And I got this feeling that students read the journal not because they enjoyed it, but because they felt it was their obligation to read a daily business newspaper if they wanted to work in business. And so kind of the thought was, let me start writing this daily roundup. One, is a way to force myself to stay up to speed with the business world, so that when I go work in sales and trading after school, I've forced myself to stay on top of what's happening in the world. But the other idea was like, let's just make something better for the college business student or anyone interested in business. So, you really can't see it up close here, but it had a lot of the original, let's call it DNA of Morning Brew. Condensed stories about the most important business topics. These blurbs were anywhere between 50 and 150 words, would talk about where the major indices were. There was a second page to this PDF also that had like a stock pitch of the day, a business person of the day, an interview question of the day. And so the whole idea was make business fun through delivering business in a concise, approachable, and conversational way. And also have like business adjacent stuff that's not hard-hitting news, but still valuable to the young business person. And, what ultimately led to Austin and I partnering up and this becoming, let's call it like a business and not just a hobby, was how many people decided to sign up for this like janky PDF that is tough on the eyes and isn't much better when you read it, that had no website, right? Like you couldn't sign up for Market Corner. If you tried, you had to message me and say, hey, can you sign me up for your business roundup? I'd like to be added to your listserv. And I literally had a listserv that was Market Corner at umich.edu that I'd add email addresses to. And Austin reached out as a reader of Market Corner being like, hey, I think there's ways that this can be better. Can we chat? We met in the Winter Garden, talked about it. I really just liked how Austin thought, because it was a totally different, I would say, just type of brain than mine. We partnered up and sent out the first email newsletter in March of 2015. So in terms of trying, there was really no monetary incentive to start writing this newsletter. Even when we came out with it in March of 2015, we didn't think of it as a business. It was so far from that, but it was just like, this is intellectually stimulating and we think there's something interesting here. So that's the left one. And the second example I'll give is my podcast, Founders Journal. This started as just basically like a pet project for me to be creative during the pandemic. And the whole concept here was, I really believe in the process of journaling. One is because I think it forces you to be introspective. And also, I've always loved the idea of like, if you memorialize things that happen in your life, it's really cool to revisit them later in life. And I've found over time, like memories are actually pretty imperfect when you just try to remember past things. So why not write them down exactly how they happened? So Founders Journal, you didn't even start within the Morning Brew ecosystem. It was just like, I was recording this, I was going live on LinkedIn, and it's just grown organically from putting out hopefully good, consistent content 3 times a week to people who are entrepreneurs, founders, also just like growth-minded professionals in companies. And, last month the show did 175,000 downloads of the podcast. This month, hopefully it'll be 250,000. So another example of like literally getting no immediate benefit from trying something, but it was just fun. And the journey of it was just as valuable as how big as it's gotten to now. Also, I'll throw a little carrot in for everyone. Of the 300 people in here, if you go and review Founders Journal on Apple Podcasts, you can literally just type in Founders Journal, go to it, and you review it. If you review it and then email me, alex@morningbrew.com, just letting me know you reviewed it. At the end of today, I'll send one random person who does that Morning Brew swag. And also I'll do like a 30-minute coaching session on anything you want to talk about, starting a business, career, whatever it is. So just leave a review on Apple Podcasts for Founders Journal and email me at alex@morningbrew.com. And I'll just gift that stuff to one person. So that is 2 things that we tried that had no immediate benefit. We didn't think about as businesses or business opportunities. But honestly, I think that's where not all businesses start from this place of not thinking about it as a business, obviously. But I think it's a really cool place where you start with something because of your genuine passion for it. And that passion of learning and diving deep into something can actually turn into a monetary opportunity that can pay for your livelihood. So that's try. Austin, I think this one's you.
Yeah, I realize I think we're maybe alternating. So risk. We risked our job. So I was in Ross, as Eric pointed out, and I decided to leave my job. I went to go intern at Moelis, which is an investment bank, and people at Ross are really into investment banking, going to finance. And Alex was a trader at Morgan Stanley, and we met up actually at a bar at Union Square, right by Union Square. I don't know the name of it. I'm sure Alex remembers, but I can tell you, I can point it out. And Alex, do you know?
I want to say it's Harry's, but I wanted to look it up. It's something like that. It's some first person name. It is Harry's. That's exactly what it is.
Yeah. And so we decided at this bar, summer of 2016, to leave our jobs in finance to go explore Morning Brew, right? We want to be entrepreneurs. We want to be founders. And we decided to take the risk. And the reason why, and I think, Alex, you've done a Founders Journal episode about this, is that if you really think about what risk is, we found out we got to the answer that perhaps the risky thing was not to leave our jobs in finance, but it was actually staying in our jobs in finance, due to the fact that we thought we could always go back into finance and get those jobs. But working at Morning Brew or starting Morning Brew was a once in a lifetime opportunity. And so we took that risk, and fortunately, so far at least, it has paid off.
And I'll correct myself. It was Pete's Tavern.
Pete's Tavern, yes.
Okay. Fail. So what I'll say is, we've had, and I don't know if this is a good or a bad thing. Actually, this is like a meta failure. I was actually not going to share this one, but I think it's an interesting one. I think our meta failure with Morning Brew is that like we haven't failed enough. Like, I think that over the course of Morning Brew, it depends on what you consider a failure. But if you consider a failure to be like a product you've launched that you put a fair bit of resources into, didn't hit its stride, didn't turn into a viable business, and you had to shut it down. Maybe we've had that happen once for us. We launched a political newsletter. It was Austin. It was called The Turnout, right?
Yeah, it was for the election.
Yeah, it was around the election cycle. We launched a newsletter that was like at the intersection of politics and business, and it didn't work out. But that was, I would say, like our only like failure from a product perspective. And I actually think that's a bad thing, because it probably means we weren't ambitious enough. And I think what you'll see as Morning Brew grows over the next year, 2 years, 3 years, is we are far more ambitious in how quickly we want to grow now and the things we're launching. And it's going to be impossible to succeed with everything, right? Like over the next year or two, we're going to launch dozens of new franchises or products, and you can't bat 1,000%. So I would actually say a partial failure of ours is not pushing ourselves hard enough to grow and accelerate the business faster with new opportunities and take risks. The second one that I would say is an absolute failure we've had, less from a product perspective and more just from like a business building perspective, is hiring. I think you don't truly appreciate how bad it is to fuck up hiring people until you've done it. And then what you realize is also, depending on the seniority of the person you hire, it exaggerates the impact. And so we've had an experience within our business where we hired a really senior person who was running an entire organization within the company, an organization that's really important for a media business. And it's exaggerated the impact of making that wrong hire, right? Because you hire a junior person, let's just say like you hire a writer. If a writer does a really bad job, it sucks. But like, if you have to let them go and hire a new writer, it doesn't impact the entire business. But with a senior leader, because so much of their job is establishing a long-term strategy and then deciding who to hire to execute on that strategy, if they mess up, the collateral effect on so many people because of not doing their job correctly is massive. And so we've experienced failing to hire the right person, and it has put back the business in terms of our timeline by many months. And I think it's just brought in awareness where it's like, you can't be too thoughtful in hiring people in general, but especially senior people. And, you know, the number one lesson we learned in hiring senior people is, unless a senior person knows to establish a strategy for their organization and who they're going to hire to actually be able to accomplish that strategy, and they're very clear about it, there's probably a yellow or red flag. So that's what I would say for failure.
All right, I'm glad we saved this one for last. I kept it short here, but it was a really interesting experience, right? You start a company and you think about the exit and selling your company one day, and you think it's going to be this big moment, like pre-sale, post-sale, and your life's going to be so different. And we did sell the company, or at least a chunk of the company. But what we've learned, I won't speak for Alex, but I can guess he has the same feeling, is your life is pretty similar the day after you sell the company, the day before. It was kind of a little poetic in a way. We sold the company mid-COVID. I was sitting at my kitchen table with my parents. So Alex and I signed the paperwork, and we were actually like, with our families. If people think about you being in Vegas and partying, and I don't think we would have done that anyway, but we didn't even have the ability to do that because it was right in the middle of quarantine. And so, yeah, I mean, it's interesting. It's like a little bit of an ending, but also a new beginning in an interesting way. And it's one of those things where you don't know what it feels like to experience it, but it's very cliche, but the journey is cooler than the destination. And so we sold the company, but and so I thought it was an important milestone to address. But what I will caution everyone is it's more about the day-to-day than the end point.
Totally agree.
Thanks, guys. That's really huge. I just wanted to ask if you had any closing points you wanted to mention before we jump to Q&A.
I mean, I would just say that building a business is an incredibly fulfilling thing. I would just reiterate that, like, the point Austin made is such an important one, because I think the news perpetuates like the sexiness of raising a shit ton of money, selling your business, and like people play out in their heads like making a ton of money from selling a company. But like at the end of the day, it like Austin was sharing, like our lives really haven't changed. We're doing the same exact thing we would have done prior to selling a business. I bought a dog. I would have bought a dog anyway. And so like, I think you really need to be excited by the idea of like grinding like 10 hours a day for many years, with the possibility of it not leading to anything, but you still would feel fulfilled from the act of doing it. Because the ironic part there is, like, by feeling good about doing that, it probably leads to a good outcome. And if if that's not how you approach business, you'll end up burning out far before you get to any sort of endpoint that you were hoping for.
Yeah, and that was a great point. And then I will selfishly remind everyone, if you have not gone to the Apple Podcast app and left a review for Founders Journal, you're missing out on some amazing swag. We're actually relaunching our store mid-October, coming out with some awesome new commerce. It's a new revenue stream for Morning Brew, but more importantly, it's a cool way for everyone to represent their brand. We'll be sending out a bunch of stuff. So please, it would help all of us out a lot if you went and just gave us a 5-star review, subscribe. Alex creates amazing content. If you want a good first episode and you're interested in the direct to consumer industry, I thought the one Alex did about a week and a half ago on Allbirds was awesome. Really breaks down that industry. So selfishly, for us, please go give us a review. We're trying to rank up those reviews.
A few random things are not about the podcast, but I will say shout out to Nick and Riley for already leaving reviews. Is that one other big lesson is like, we live in an age where most things are commoditized in business, but owning an audience is not. And so the only way we are able to launch a swag store that actually could be a meaningful revenue driver is because we have an audience of, 4+ million people who have an affinity for the brand. And so when you actually offer them swag related to the brew, they're willing to buy it. And so I think this is a whole nother soapbox, but like as students building online personas, there's absolutely downside of it, but there's amazing opportunity that's created by creating content online.
Yeah, that's phenomenal. I mean, you guys touched on so much that I wanted to try to pull out in the conversation anyway. So thank you for all of that. One of the things that I heard, I think Austin, I think maybe you mentioned this in a podcast I was listening to. It may have been the one where Alex, you were interviewing him as your co-founder, but the need for people, for those who you hire, to have that internal sense of defaulting to action and how critical it is to have that when you're going to work at a startup, really anywhere, but especially a startup. Talk to the students a little bit about, to some extent, if you have that, you have that, right? That's who you are. That's how you find your work ethic. That's kind of what you value spending your time around. But going back to 5 years, 6, 7 years ago, when you guys were still students, looking back now, what do you wish you would have known? What do you wish you would have polished while you were at Michigan? What skill set? What do you find would have been really valuable had you known to do more?
Yeah, I think that first thing you said is really important, right? Like defaulting to action, right? Because at a startup, you have no value. The company's not worth anything. And so there's nothing to lose if you do something, right? You just think you fail and who cares? Something worth zero is still worth zero. As opposed to if you go work at a big corporation, they have to, everything has so many legal or operational hoops to jump through because there is so much value and no idea, you go work at Apple, company's worth like a couple $1 trillion. No idea you're going to come up with is going to really increase the value of Apple. And so therefore it's all about downside protection. So a big company worth downside is all about downside protection versus a startup is all about value increasing, right? And that's the only way startups can actually like thrive in this world. You think about how a company with a few people and no value can actually create value. It's because the big companies it's innovator's dilemma. They have so many reasons why they can't start something new, disrupt themselves or whatever. And so we talk about this a lot, but just building true, genuine curiosity. If you're truly curious about something, you learn how to learn. And learning how to learn is everything, right? I think back to this, I truly have no idea how we learn some of the stuff we know now. Like we started a company, we didn't even know how a company is structured, right? And we a lot of times we made mistakes because of that, which is why, I think we were maybe a little bit less, we had a little bit less emphasis on advisors and mentors who could truly help us think about business than we did. I think we thought about advisors in a little bit the wrong way. But we learned how to learn over time. We wake up, we had 10 hours in a day. I was like, okay, say I'm going to learn what a CFO does because I have no idea. But one day we may need one of those, or is that day today? We just didn't know. So find something you care about and just go down the rabbit hole. And I think that is the most important skill people can learn today. Is like there's all these people out there learning via YouTube or Google. Like the information's out there. And just learning how to learn is so incredibly important.
Oh, Alex, go ahead. You're on mute, by the way.
I think, what Austin said is so true. And two things that it makes me think about is defaulting to action like sounds obvious, but I think when you're in like the throes of a business, and you have to imagine like with a startup, you have a list of about 100 questions they need to answer. As you start answering those questions, you have more questions that come out of the questions you answer. And so it's like, yes, defaulting to action is obvious, and it's what you need to do. But I think also you shouldn't just like write it off in terms of what Austin's saying is like, that's obvious, because it is really hard. It is hard to just take action when you really have no idea what you're doing is right or wrong. But you actually just embrace the idea that creating momentum in itself, even if you don't know it's the right or wrong thing to do, is actually more valuable than not doing anything. There's also this interesting thing, and people have mixed feelings on Gary V, but like Gary, I was watching this video by Gary today where he was basically saying he's like, I think laziness is actually a good thing. And he's like, I think laziness is a good thing because it's an internal trigger to tell yourself, clearly you don't find whatever you're doing to be interesting enough or mentally stimulating to you or makes you curious enough. Because if you weren't lazy, like if you actually were super engaged and went down the rabbit hole, you would know you would have something that you're super engaged by. I think him saying that is slightly hyperbolic. Like I think some people are just lazy, but I do think taking stock of yourself to know like, how do you feel when you're just working on something for hours, and do you feel motivated to keep learning more and more, is generally a good sign to say like, are you working on something that is worth your time? And the final piece I would just say is like, the entrepreneurial journey is as much like a mental journey and understanding yourself as it is like creating a startup. And I found that like, it's a journey that vacillates so much from like, I would say like, unrelenting exuberance and overconfidence to the feeling like I know nothing, right? Like there's these huge swings from feeling like you feel like you've mastered media and you know all you need to know, to then asking yourself the question sometimes, if I had to do this again from scratch, could I do it? I don't know. And so I think that's a big thing also, is like you learn honestly more about yourself than you learn about building a business while building a business.
So let's dive in off of that. And students, by the way, you're welcome to chime in with questions via Zoom here. So don't.
Yeah. And I think there's already 12 or 13 questions.
I could not begin to tell you why I don't see it on my end. That's so weird. Doesn't show any questions. Nick or any of my colleagues, if you see them, feel free to start sharing those or the like. So one of the things that you were kind of talking about there was how much you learn about yourself through the journey and through this evolution. You guys have gone from, obviously, to your point, a PDF that was being circulated via listserv here at U of M to now having 3 million subscribers. But you've done it in an attempt to try to maintain that niche relationship, customer relationship dynamic that you seem to have built into the core of Morning Brew. I heard you talk about in a podcast how important it was to constantly write back to people who replied and to ensure that they felt like there was a personal voice and a tone and a narrative that was coming through. How do you scale that when you get to 3 million? Talk to us about the challenges of how you have had to adapt with that.
I'll give you an answer, but it's not a very good one. You hire someone really, really, really good who owns that over the course of 5 years. Like, we just hired an incredible managing editor who has taken, and I'm actually curious Alex's thoughts, but Alex and I had this vision in our head of what the voice could sound like. And I think one unique thing that we don't give enough credit to is that like Alex and I could speak to each other in that voice, right? We understood that same voice, but we couldn't write in it. And then we hired some amazing, talented people, or one in particular, who was really able to scale that voice. And now it's just about, only hiring the very best of the very best writers. At first, we could basically only hire a few people who would come work for us. And now we get thousands of applications for each writer role. And it's about really only taking the top I don't know, 0.25%, 0.1%. And what's funny is these applications, like Alex and I used to go through hundreds of them, and you can tell within the first, generously, maybe 25 words, if it's an application worth reading. Like you can just tell most people don't have it. And we certainly, don't have it, at least at the scale it is now. But it's about hiring good people and empowering them to run with it.
Yeah. I mean, Austin and I would always say this with our writers, but it's, and I think my guess is this is the case for any new business, especially in like their core competency, is like you really have to source unicorns in that core competency. And right, like our core competency was like delivering edutainment. And the reason it's such a unicorn role to hire for is if you hire just like a traditional journalist, you're going to get people that write in a very specific way that it's going to be hard to break out of the mold and like write with tone and like just this quick wittedness. If you hire someone who's never written before, you may get someone who's funny, but like doesn't have any of the chops as it relates to like grammar, sentence structure, flow. So you have to find someone who is funny, but also obsessed with the news and can write with great sentence structure and flow. And also someone who's willing to do it forever.
Forever.
And so I think that was extremely difficult. We actually got very lucky, if we're being honest, because the person who's our managing editor now, we didn't hire him at first. We rejected him and hired someone before him. The person we gave an offer to before him has another business newsletter and decided that they didn't want to stop writing that. So then they rejected our offer to them. We went back to the guy we have now. We're like, hey, we'd actually love to hire you now. So it would be really interesting to think about where would we be now if the first person had accepted that job offer. The other part of your question that I would say is just as hard, if not harder, is how do you scale voice outside of text, right? Like Morning Brew is spending so much time now growing in multimedia, podcasts, video, social, events. How do you maintain this quick-wittedness, this approachability, this levity to business information in voice and mannerisms versus text? And we're in the throes of doing that now, so we don't have the answer, but I would say that is another hard piece of it.
So that's okay. That means you can come back in a year and give us that answer in Classic.
There you go.
Hopefully we have that answer.
Yeah, if not 2 years, that's okay. We'll wait. So, you guys have talked about the importance of hiring good people, and it's very obvious from the way you've built the company to the hiring that you've done, and then the relationship that it's very apparent you have with each other, the importance of relationships and the importance of being able to have trust in the interpersonal dynamic that you have with not only your colleagues, but also your customers. One of the things that we always really try to emphasize and make clear to students, and I don't think we could ever do enough of it, is to help them understand the value of what it means to be a Michigan student, a Michigan alum, to be part of that community, part of that network. You guys are an incredible success story at how my understanding is that you really leveraged that when you were getting ready to graduate and when you were students, and really kind of got some of that initial seed funding from the Michigan network that you otherwise were able to tap into. I don't want to put words in your mouth about why it's valuable, but if you can, and I don't know how to ask the question in a way that frames it, but speak to the intangibles and what it is that is the differentiator about having that network and being a part of it. What uniquely does it provide, and what opportunity does it create that you wouldn't get if you weren't here?
Alec, I mean, I can go, you can go. It's up to you.
Yeah, all you.
Yeah, I mean, so some of the very earliest funding we had was from some of the Michigan programs, right? Whether it was from CFE or Zell. So, I mean, early on, that was huge for us. We didn't have any money. And I don't know where we'd be without that. But then also, what you learn is that so much of either getting an investor or a mentor or something else is just like an initial connection. And for whatever reason, Michigan, just like the network, has that relationship and that connection, and it's Michigan or it's Ross or whatever else. But it's almost like hard to speak to that because that's the only experience we have. Like, I'm sure it is so much more valuable than I think, which I think it is incredibly valuable because I have no other experience. So, might need to compare that experience to someone who went to, school with maybe a weaker alumni network. But Alex, I'm curious your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it was massive not only for like getting grants before we fundraise. Like we still have a picture somewhere of Austin doing the pitch competition and winning the pitch competition. I can't remember what the winning prize was. Was it like $10,000, $15,000? But then when we raised our round of capital, the largest check was Zell Lurie from one of Zell Lurie's funds. But then also so many of the individuals who ended up investing were either literally Michigan folks or connections through the Michigan network. Like, I can't remember if Austin had them, but definitely my marketing professor wrote a check into Morning Brew. Like to have support from literally like professors at Michigan was amazing. And I think there's also just like this, when you feel like you have the constant support of a network, it's also so incredibly valuable when entrepreneurship is just generally like a lonely and isolating journey until you've actually built something of substance. And so to have a network that feels like it is celebrating your wins throughout, even when they're tiny wins, is like, you can't discount that also, right? Like I still have in my room when we were first written up in the Daily, I still have the physical paper. So yeah, I mean, it's massive. The only knock I'd give on Michigan is not giving us super low football tickets in the big house. I'm still really fucking pissed about that. But other than that, Michigan has done amazing stuff for us.
Someone in development is listening, I'm sure, and they will be happy to.
I would do anything to move my seats lower in the big house.
Duly noted. That's super helpful. I appreciate you guys kind of laying some context out on that. One of the student questions that came in, I think kind of stemming off of that is, what were the struggles? What were some of the things you struggled with initially that now, seem like problems you can't imagine having again? I guess I don't think of how to reframe that. Now that you're so far down the road of Morning Brew and so far in its evolution and experience, when you look back now, what did you perceive as a tremendously big challenge or problem that in hindsight was like, oh no, that wasn't really a big deal. We focused way too much on something that didn't really matter.
I mean, I wouldn't say we discount this, but we just don't have to think about it as much anymore. It's like in the early days, we really had to fight for every subscriber, right? Like not that we take for granted our customers, but it's like the scale has totally changed. And because of the resources we have, we can grow our audience at a pace we would have never imagined, right? Like for the first few years of the business, we were monitoring every subscriber who subscribed to the Brew. We'd get a notification with the exact email of who had subscribed. If we did that now, like we'd literally like our eyeballs would fall out. So it's like, I think getting to like, I guess like content market fit is not something we think about nearly as much anymore because we've gotten there. And everything it's actually going to be harder to assess if a product is good, because if you start from zero, you can very easily say like, I've been creating content for X number of months and no one is still reading it. But now when you have an audience of 4 million people, even if we put out the world's worst content, there would be some audience for a period of time.
Yeah, that's helpful. To your point about kind of being in that position now, however we kind of frame that up, it makes me wonder, would Morning Brew be successful if launched today in 2021 in the media market that we have now and everything else post-corona, just like it was in 17, or was it just a matter of aligning with timing that provided for a runway that might not be present today?
So the answer is yes and no. A lot of people told us in 2017, Morning Brew won't be successful following a similar playbook as the Skim because the Skim did it 3 years prior. So I think the answer is, can someone build the next Morning Brew? Absolutely. They just can't do it the same way we did it. They can get to the same place or a similar place, but you can't just say, hey, and so many people try to do this. They say, hey, like they'll call me or they'll email me, hey, like, can you tell me everything you did? I'm going to create the morning brew for X. And it's like, I'm happy to tell you everything we did, because there's just no way you're going to, we've hit this velocity and this size of newsletter where it's not even like a competition thing. It's costs have gone up on Facebook and marketing costs. And there are so many newsletters out there and for so many different reasons. And also, like, what people don't talk about is we had 2 years as students at Michigan where we didn't have to get paid, where, we thought of it as a side project. So there are all these reasons why you can't recreate Morning Brew the way we did, but you can absolutely recreate Morning Brew in a very unique and different way. And maybe that is, leveraging podcasts, or maybe that is more of a community driven thing, or maybe that's leveraging crypto as a way to compensate people, or I don't know what exactly, but there is a way to do it. You just can't do it the same way we did.
Agreed.
Yeah. Well, what's the biggest misconception about being a founder?
That's a good question. I
would just say people
Yeah,
think that the grass is always greener. Like people just like think being a founder is like the best thing, like is amazing. But I would say there's a lot of downsides to being a founder. Like it's way harder to maintain balance in life if you're not careful, right? Like there's other shit in your life that matters honestly more than having a business, which is like your family, the people you love, all these things. And I think if I'm being honest, I've met a number of founders who are, people look from the outside and they're like, I want to be that person, like, worth hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars, have founded 3 or 4 companies. But when I talk to them, they seem pretty miserable. And like, they seem like they don't have anything to their name other than their businesses. And so I would just say that, like, yes, there's definitely benefits to being a founder. Like I like getting free clothing from our advertisers sometimes, but like, there's also so much stuff that isn't that great or can be really challenging. And it's just in our nature as humans to always think the grass is greener. And I think honestly, so much value can be had in just like figuring out exercises to do to feel settled to feel both ambitious, but also good and settled in the exact position you're in.
Yeah. I think the other thing is, people try to copy or people think of Alex and I as a reason to go into entrepreneurship right out of college. And like, yeah, I would say based off of some people's version of success, we were successful, but I would caution everyone, entrepreneurship's amazing, but there's a time and place for it. And there was a lot of luck in what Alex and I did. And I just want to be I'm very transparent about that now. Maybe I wasn't so much before, but we got lucky. And again, we worked really hard. We had a good strategy. We hired the right people, all of that. But there was a lot of luck in becoming successful, especially when you know nothing before. And, I know a lot of people who it's a really exciting time to start a company and they're just starting the first idea they have, or they're starting to think about anything they know about. And that's great, but just be careful because there's a lot of luck involved if you don't know what you're really getting yourself into.
And one last thing I'll just add there is if your first go this is why I think everyone even working on like establishing their own internal confidence is really important, because like most entrepreneurs don't succeed the first go. Like I remember Austin and I have talked about this before, how there's like a totally different culture in like a country like Israel, where it's like founders found like 3, 4, 5 businesses before they have a large outcome or a large success. And that's not like frowned upon. And so I think we also just societally put a ton of pressure on ourselves that we have to succeed with this first thing. And if we don't, we weren't meant for entrepreneurship. And I would say like, that is the other thing that is just really important to be cognizant of, because we could have easily failed with Morning Brew if we didn't have some things like kind of fall our way. But that doesn't mean we were good or bad entrepreneurs. It just means with this specific thing, it did not work out.
To that line of thinking, one of the things at a brass tacks, like leveling with you, kind of honesty, we struggle with U of M students, as you guys probably remember from being here, where there's not that same culture of risk taking and of acceptance of failure that there might be in some of the Ivies and some of the peers like on the coast and on the West Coast and all. Two questions kind of off of that. One, was there something, was there a moment, was there a teacher, was there an education, a lesson, or something that kind of epiphanied to you and clicked to where it was like, okay, yeah, no, we can take this risk. If we flop, we flop. But you know what? I don't want to work in finance. I don't want to just jump into that career. I want to try this first. Was there a moment? Was there a thing?
Yes, and Alex can walk you through his thinking on leaving, because I think it's really clear thinking. But I also think there's some extent that we were so naive that we just didn't, we didn't know what success was. So like what even was, did we succeed? I don't know. Like, it depends who you ask. There are a lot of people who would say that what we did was like fairly unsuccessful, right? Like in the grand scheme of entrepreneurship. But we were just looking back when we decided this, we thought there was a 0% chance we fail. Like deep down, it was like 0%. We're like, this is going to succeed 100%. There's no way it doesn't. And in hindsight, we were also way further behind. Like, we're like, oh yeah, we're like close to success. And then we started really having conversations with people in media or with advertisers or whatever. And we're like, wow, we're nowhere. We have a long way to go. So there's a little bit of like naive, like you were a little naive, a little bit of overconfidence. And then Alex can walk you through his thinking, because I think it was like more linear, clear thinking.
Yeah. And I would just reiterate there, like so much of this, I would say it was like half thought process, half complete being naive, really. I would just say, so there's a few things. One way to look at it was risk reward and what is really the worst thing that can happen. And when you think about like the worst thing that can happen with a Michigan degree, it's like not that bad of a scenario, right? Like seriously, like what happens? Your business fails. Go to business school. You have a cool story now. Go back to your old job where hopefully you haven't burned all your bridges. Go join another startup as you've built a network in the startup scene. Like the worst case scenario isn't that bad. I hate plugging my podcast, but I've just talked about so many of these topics we're talking about so many times. I would just encourage people to listen to today's episode, because the other thing that honestly got me to make the leap was just having perspective. And I talk about it in today's podcast, but basically the big thing was when I was at Michigan, my dad passed away, and it kind of like totally changed the dynamic of everything, right? Like to me, it's like nothing worse could happen than that. So me going and starting a business and that failing, like that's a freaking cakewalk. And so like that was honestly how I thought about it, is like, I just want to spend my life doing things that truly light me up. And it's hard to teach that thing. And I talk about in today's episode, how like, what gives you perspective if hopefully you don't have to go through something that I went through, because the hope is that people don't. And I talk about how you can learn through other people's experiences with gaining perspective. And I know Austin has read this book a bunch. And I read this book. It's called When Breath Becomes Air. Yeah. And to me, that is an example of how you can gain perspective, even without you experiencing the change in perspective. But the long story short, this book is about a chief neurosurgery resident, Paul Kalanithi, who ended up having stage 4 lung cancer, I believe. The book is a memoir about his journey with cancer and ultimately his final moments in life and becoming super clear on what mattered to him.
Yeah, I couldn't recommend that book enough either. It's a great read, set perspective. We have to wrap class. I could talk with you guys for like the next 4 hours, but again, just means you got to come back now and do it again.
There we go.
So one quick thought to kind of wrap class on, as people who have entered the working world and done all that you have, and having been not that far removed from campus, you have some perspective on hiring and what differentiates a student who is learning and networking in Ann Arbor versus other parts of the country. Give the students some pro tips, like, hey, you really probably have a leg up doing this, or your personality that you don't realize is a bit shaped by being in the Midwest at this big, institution that's known for pedigree and research, play up this, play up that. What would you advise they do as they head into interviews to really leverage that Michigan background, connection, and education?
I think it depends what job you're looking to go into. If you're looking, again, if you're going into finance, it's a very different answer, but I assume not many people here are looking to go into finance. So I'll give a more general answer, which is, it's what I said before, like show that you have deep interests in something, right? When I interview someone and I find out like, oh, I'm really interested in cooking. I'll be like, okay, great. Tell me about how interested you are in cooking. And tell me like what you cook and anything. And if someone like, puts on their resume, oh, I'm really interested in cooking, and they can't answer like my third question about cooking, it's like, yeah, you're probably not that interested in cooking. And therefore, like either you don't know what to put in your resume, which means you're not a very interesting person, or your definition of being interested or learning something is probably pretty weak. And but conversely, if you can teach me, if I can sit there for 20 minutes and you can teach me all about, I don't know, some Japanese cooking technique that you've learned on YouTube and that you like took a class in or something, I'm like, okay, well, I don't really care if you know anything about sales, because that's easy to learn. And if you've taught yourself, you spent 100 hours learning how to make sushi, like, yeah, I'm pretty confident you can learn Salesforce. That can't be that hard. Again, it's just about learning. And so I mean, that's what I look for. To me, that's what differentiates people. Is that.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I wish there was a tool that this would be highly against data privacy, so it's not going to exist, but a tool that could literally monitor how long someone spends to go down a specific rabbit hole. Like if I saw 150 hours spent on reading cooking blogs, I would hire that person, because most people don't spend more than 10 hours going down the rabbit hole. Yeah, I mean, I would just say, one, leverage the Michigan network. It's massive, and it's it's like in sales. I was just talking to someone about how did we start selling it out in Morning Brew. It start with your warmest leads, and your warmest leads are going to be people that already you're going to have an unfair advantage with because of your connection to them, and that's going to be Michigan people that work in some form of the startup or entrepreneurship ecosystem, if that's what you want to get into. The second concept I would say is, like, honestly, putting in like 5% more work generally is a huge differentiator, because most people are lazy. And there's this concept, I think Jack Butcher, who's a guy on Twitter, came up with, which is called permissionless apprenticeship. And it's basically making yourself an apprentice of someone without asking. And so I'll give you an example. The first producer for my podcast, we hired him because of permissionless apprenticeship. He took all of the episodes that I had recorded, literally, like at the time it was like 50 episodes of Founders Journal, listened to all of them, created an online summary of all of them, and created social posts from videos he found online of them. And I said, you basically did all this free work. It had to have been like 40 hours of work. You clearly care enough. Like, just keep doing this for me. And so to me, it's like, how do you make it impossible for someone to say no to you? Like, that's how you do it, is you do work without being asked.
Yeah, I don't think I could end on a better note than that. That's phenomenal advice. Thanks, guys. Really appreciate you sharing the time.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely.
Sure.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
Have a great day, everyone.
Yeah. Enjoy the weekend. Go Blue, everybody.
Later, guys. Go Blue.
Cheers.